The rain had just stopped when Clara stepped off the wagon and into the dim light of the setting sun. The air smelled of wet dust and pine, the kind of scent that belonged only to the open country. She held a small suitcase in both hands, her knuckles pale from gripping it too hard. Around her the world felt impossibly wide. Miles of amber grass rolling toward distant hills, a weather-beaten fence, and standing against the gold and gray sky, a tall man with a hat pulled low. Ethan McCade watched her for a long moment before moving forward. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth, each step slow and certain. Clara had seen his photograph once, a grainy black and white picture sent by post, but nothing had prepared her for the quiet steadiness of him in person. He had the calm of someone who had lived too long with silence, and maybe a little too long without hope. "You made it," he said simply. His voice carried through the stillness like the first sound after a storm. Clara nodded, unable to speak for a second. "The road was rough," she managed, her voice trembling. "They usually are," he replied with a small smile. "Let me take your bag." She hesitated. The bag felt like the last thing she could call her own, a small collection of things that tied her to the life she'd left behind in Missouri. But his hand was gentle, patient, and she finally let him take it. The ranch stretched out behind him, modest but sturdy, a main house with whitewashed walls and a wide porch, a barn, a corral where a few horses shifted restlessly. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the faint scent of stew. For a woman who had known only the clamor of city streets and the sharp voices of people who never stayed, it looked like something close to peace. Inside, the house was warm, the fire throwing soft light across the wooden walls. Clara stood just inside the doorway, dripping slightly from the rain. Ethan set her suitcase by the stairs and gestured toward the hearth. "You'll catch cold standing there." "Come sit," he said. She obeyed, perching on the edge of a chair like a student unsure of her lesson. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to her. The steam curled between them, carrying the faint smell of roasted beans and ash. "You can rest easy here," he said after a while. "No one will ask more of you than you can give." His words hit her harder than he could have known. She had come all this way because someone had written to her. A widower who needed a companion, someone to share the work and the loneliness. She'd answered because her own life had run out of choices. A father gone, a family scattered, a town that had grown too small for her sorrow. The letter had seemed like a door opening to something gentler. But now that she was here, now that she saw him, the quiet strength of him, the calm patience, she felt utterly unprepared. "I don't know how to be a wife," she whispered, almost before she knew she'd spoken aloud. Ethan's eyes lifted from his cup. There was no surprise in them, only understanding. He set the mug down and leaned back slightly in his chair. "Then don't be," he said softly. "Not yet. We'll just learn what it means together." She looked at him, searching his face for any trace of mockery or pity. There was none, only the steady kindness of a man who had weathered storms far worse than awkward silences. He went on, his voice low and calm. "This place doesn't ask for much, just honesty, hard work, and a bit of heart. The rest can come when it's ready." Something eased in her chest, the knot of fear loosening slightly. She had expected rules, expectations, maybe even distance. Instead, he offered her space, a rare kind of grace. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire popped softly. Outside, the rain began again, a slow rhythm against the window. Clara felt the weight of the day pressing down, the miles she had traveled, the people she had left behind, the strangeness of standing in a stranger's home and realizing it might soon be hers. Ethan rose and fetched a small blanket from the back of the couch, placing it around her shoulders without a word. His hand brushed hers, brief and careful, but in that touch she felt something steady. Not passion, not yet, but a quiet promise that she would not have to face her new world alone. "You must be tired," he said. "I'll show you to your room." She followed him up the narrow staircase, the boards creaking underfoot. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar and soap. He stopped at a door halfway down. Inside was a small room with a single bed, a wooden chest, and a window that looked out toward the open fields. "It isn't much," he said, "but it's yours." It's lovely," she murmured. And it was, simple and still, like a fresh page waiting for words. Ethan nodded and stepped back. Rest now. Tomorrow we'll ride out to the north pasture. I'll show you the land. Thank you, she said quietly. He paused at the doorway, hand on the frame. Clara, he said after a moment. She looked up. You don't have to try so hard to be what you think I need. Just be yourself. That's enough. The words hung in the air long after he'd gone. She sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the faint pattern on the quilt with her fingers. No one had ever told her that being herself could be enough. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, whispering through the eaves. She drew the blanket tighter and lay back, staring up at the ceiling. The sounds of the ranch, a distant horse snort, the soft creak of the house settling, began to soothe her. She thought of the way he'd looked at her, not as if she were something fragile or lost, but as if she were simply real, a person with a past, standing at the beginning of something new. For the first time in a long while, Clara let her eyes close without fear of tomorrow. Downstairs, Ethan sat by the fire, the flames flickering across his thoughtful face. He could hear the rain again, steady and sure, drumming its quiet rhythm on the roof. He wasn't a man of many words, but something about the girl upstairs, her trembling voice, her brave little confession, had stirred a part of him he'd kept locked away. Maybe, he thought, this was how healing began. Not with grand gestures, but with simple words spoken softly in a quiet house. A promise made not in vows, but in understanding. Outside, the ranch slept under the slow, silver rain, and somewhere in that hush, two hearts, weary, uncertain, but willing, began to find their rhythm together. The first light of dawn touched the window, soft and golden, when Clara woke. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The quiet hum of the ranch, the wind against the shutters, the faint lowing of cattle, pulled her slowly back into the present. The blanket Ethan had placed around her the night before still lay across her shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, and that small comfort steadied her. She dressed quickly, smoothing the creases from her skirt, and washed her face in the small basin near the window. The reflection staring back at her looked pale but calmer than the frightened woman who'd arrived last night. She took a deep breath, tied back her hair, and stepped quietly into the hallway. Downstairs, the fire was already burning. Ethan stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring something that smelled of eggs and coffee. The light fell across him, catching the dust in the air, turning it to gold. "Morning," he said without turning. "Good morning," she answered softly. He glanced back with a small smile. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough," she said. "The bed's soft. The house feels safe." "Good," he said simply. "That's what it's meant to feel like." They ate together at the small wooden table. Neither spoke much, but it wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the quiet of people who were learning how to share space. When they were done, Ethan stood, pushing his chair back gently. "Come on," he said, grabbing his hat. "Time to see the land." Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, pale blue fading into silver where the mist still clung to the hills. Clara followed him through the yard, her boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. Horses stood near the fence, steam curling from their nostrils. Ethan reached for the nearest, a chestnut mare, running a steady hand down her neck. "This one's Molly," he said. "Gentle as they come. You'll like her." Clara hesitated. She'd never ridden before, not properly, and the size of the animal made her heart skip. Ethan noticed. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll walk beside you." He helped her mount, his hands firm but careful, and for a moment she was aware only of how close he was. The steadiness of him, the quiet confidence that made her want to trust him even when her knees trembled. The morning passed slowly as they rode along the edge of the pastures. The grass sparkled with dew. The air was crisp and filled with the smell of wet earth. Ethan pointed out the boundaries of the land, the old oak that marked the northern fence, the stream that curved through the lower field. "This land's been in my family near 40 years, he said. My father built the house with his own hands, every board in it, every nail hammered by him and my mother. Clara listened, her heart caught somewhere between admiration and melancholy. It must have been lonely when they were gone. Ethan nodded. It was. Still is, sometimes. They reached the top of a small hill, where the view opened wide across the valley. From there, the ranch looked small, a patch of humanity set against a sea of open wild. Clara drew in a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs like new life. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes soft beneath the brim of his hat. "I reckon it's starting to be." Something in his tone made her cheeks warm, and she looked away quickly, pretending to study the horizon. They stayed there for a while, the wind lifting her hair, the sun breaking fully through the clouds. By the time they returned to the house, her legs ached and her hands were sore from gripping the reins, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Ethan noticed it and said nothing, only smiled a little as he led the horses back into the barn. That afternoon, Clara helped him with small chores, feeding the hens, gathering wood for the fire, wiping dust from the shelves. She wasn't sure if she was doing any of it right, but Ethan never corrected her sharply. When she dropped an egg, he only chuckled. "Reckon even the hens make mistakes sometimes," he said, handing her another. As the day wore on, she began to feel the rhythm of the ranch, slow, honest, grounding. The loneliness she'd carried with her from the city began to soften, replaced by a quiet satisfaction in simple things. The creak of the barn door, the smell of sun on hay, the low hum of wind through the fields. When evening came, Ethan brought out his old guitar. They sat on the porch as the sky turned rose and violet, and he played a tune, something low and tender, a song that sounded like the land itself. Clara listened, her hands folded in her lap, her heart unexpectedly full. "I didn't know you played," she said. He shrugged. "Only when there's someone worth playing for." The words caught her off guard, and she looked down, unsure how to answer. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sun slipped behind the hills, and the first stars blinked awake above them. When the air grew cooler, Ethan set the guitar aside. "You did well today," he said. "Didn't let the land scare you." "It still does a little," she admitted, "but it also feels like it's teaching me something." He nodded. "That's all it asks, that you listen." She turned her head, studying him in the fading light. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," he said softly. "Most things are when you stop running from them." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Clara's heart ached with something she couldn't yet name, not quite love, not yet, but a warmth that reached the lonely parts of her and told them they could rest. When she finally stood to go inside, Ethan rose too. At the door she hesitated. "Ethan," she said, barely above a whisper. "Thank you for being patient with me." He smiled, small and real. Patience comes easy when it's for someone worth waiting on. For a heartbeat, the world went still, the stars above, the soft hum of crickets below. Then Clara nodded, her throat tight with unspoken feeling, and stepped inside. That night, as she lay in her small room, the ranch no longer felt like a stranger's house. It felt like something alive, something she was slowly becoming a part of. Outside, she could hear Ethan moving around downstairs, the soft scrape of a chair, the fading notes of another song. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt not lost, but found. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both knew that whatever had begun between them, quiet, uncertain, and full of grace, was something that might just last a lifetime.